Let you know when it's going. All right, welcome back to the Texas and Tomahawks podcast. This is also going to be a special edition for Dark Saber in season 3 this year because this is a dual purpose podcast. But I really wanted to get Meghan Klement on. My name is Adam Dorito. I am a paratrooper, a farmer, and an oil and gas worker here in the state of Colorado. I also am a huge military advocacy worker in DC for the Dorito Act and various other pieces of military legislation involving military sexual assault, retaliation, and reforming our military and taking it seriously to the point where we're going to try to hold our military leaders and chain of commands accountable. I mean, it's never happened before. It's a huge problem, and we're going to discuss it. And how Meghan and I got connected was I was out in D.C. lobbying for the Dorito Act, and ironically, at the same time, the Coast Guard hearing was going on with Senator Blumenthal's office at the same time. And if anyone knows anything about Operation Vaker, which I'm sure Meghan's going to explain to us, it's an absolute disaster. And, to me, none of this stuff surprises me anymore. At this point, it just goes, I told you so. I've been doing this for over 14 years from my sexual assault case at the Air Force Academy with medical records retaliation. And it just breaks my heart consistently hearing these stories over and over and over again. And our military leaders and a lot of our congressional leaders absolutely refuse to do anything about it. So, Meghan, I want to thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad we finally were able to make this work out.
So tell me more about you. Where are you from? What inspired you to join the Coast Guard, and which is technically not the military? I like to give you coastie shit all the time, but it's fine. Yeah, tell me who you are, where you're from, and give me your background.
Okay, so I grew up in a really small town in Southwest Washington. Literally grew up in this house that my dad built. I never moved. My dad was a fireman my whole life, and my mom worked for the VA hospital, and she worked in hospice care. My dad served in the Navy. My brother served in the Navy. All my grandfathers and so forth all served. So I grew up in a family that was very patriotic. From a very young age, I remember going, I want to feel that sense of pride. Saving Private Ryan was my favorite movie, and I watched that when it came out. I would think I was like 5 years old. And I just remember like feeling this burning passion inside me. Like, wow, they really did something incredible that means something. And so I kind of always had that in me. I was really horrible in school. And so I knew that college just like was not in the cards for me. I did not care about academics whatsoever. So I had been with a boyfriend that I thought I was going to marry, and I had told him that I was going to join the service, and he said, if you do that, I will break up with you. We ended up breaking up, and I went that week, and I went to the recruiter's office, and I came home and I said, Dad, I'm going to join the service. And my dad said, I was actually initially going to go into the Navy because my dad and my brother both were in the Navy. And I have 3 older brothers, so I'm the only girl. And my dad said, well, I know you're going to do it anyways. So if you do it, I would really like it if you joined the Coast Guard, because I don't want my only daughter going overseas, and I think that you're going to be safer in a smaller service. So I agreed, and that's why I joined the Coast Guard. I left for boot camp like a month after my 19th birthday. So, I mean, that's kind of where it all began.
So what was basic training like for you when you first went into the Coast Guard? Like, what's the differences? Obviously, I come from the military side of the house, so I'm not really sure about how really the Coast Guard works. You guys like build sandcastles and play with seals? Is that how it works?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Perfect.
That is like the first thing is to have a sandcastle contest.
Awesome.
No, actually, Coast Guard boot camp is actually very challenging. And what a lot of people don't know is that the Coast Guard kind of has an old, long-running relationship with the Marine Corps back to when Douglas Monroe sacrificed his life for a ton of Marines. So there's always just kind of been that connection. So actually the training that we do in Coast Guard boot camp is the same style as the Marine Corps training. It was tough.
And where is Coast Guard basic training?
Cape May, New Jersey.
Yeah, go Jersey.
Yeah, I was actually in boot camp when Hurricane Sandy hit.
Oh, nice.
So they had to evacuate us to Fort Dix.
Perfect. I spent a lot of time down there.
There was a lot of cockroaches. I was there over Halloween. So, yeah, boot camp was like a really rewarding experience for me. It was the first thing that I had gone out and done on my own and accomplished on my own. And I actually had a hard time adjusting. So
you had a hard time adjusting? Please explain.
Yeah, so I was kind of like a problem. So they put me into a program. It's called RAMP, Recruit Aptitude Motivation Program. And so they actually separated us from our company for 72 hours. They woke us up an hour early and we went to bed an hour late. I'm not sure if they're still doing that, but we had to pack up all of our belongings. They completely separated us from our company, and we had to wear red reflector belts. And every time our left foot hit the ground, for 3 days, we had to yell the word ramp, and we had to walk we still got to attend class with our companies. So like they marched us behind the company. It was totally like a humiliation thing, but they also IT'd us.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yeah, they IT'd us very hard, and I actually had to go through it twice. Not because I was crappy, but because I am flat-footed. So they had me they checked on me and made sure that my flat feet were holding up or something. I had just gotten tagged going through MEPS. So I had finished the first night, which was the worst night. They bring us in, night 2, they bring us into the indoctrination recruits that it just got there, and they call it the Ramp Road Show. And they make them all form around us and then watch us, and they there's 5 instructors to 12 recruits. So it's pretty intense. But I went into physical therapy and they're like, hey, your legs are swollen. We think you have stress fractures from your flat feet.
Which is actually pretty common with a lot of women in the military in general. They actually have a lot of stress fractures and stuff from carrying equipment and things like that.
Well, I was like, please don't do this to me, because if you do it, I have to go back and repeat it.
Yes, you do.
And I got in trouble they're like, are you arguing with us? I was like, oh, no, I guess I'm not. So I had to go back and repeat it again.
So when you join the Coast Guard, I don't know what they call it. Did they call it MOSs, like your job title code in the Coast Guard as well?
You do not join with an MOS in the Coast Guard.
Okay, so you don't find out your job until after you finish basic training, kind of thing?
You go and you're considered a non-rate, but you leave boot camp as an E2. You can leave as an E3 if you do the 6 years, but I was everybody makes E3 in 6 months anyways.
Yeah.
And once your 6-month mark hits, then you can put your name on an A school list.
Gotcha.
And yeah, they're depending on what you do, some of them are really long. Aviation's going to be really long.
Right.
But if you want to go be a cook, you could probably go do that 30 days.
So what job assignment did you get leaving boot camp?
I went to a small boat station in Nia Bay. I lived on an Indian reservation. It was isolated. I was 2 hours from the closest town. We had 25-foot boats and 47-foot boats, and it was in the Strait of Juan de Fuca, right where the strait opens up to the Pacific Ocean. So it was actually pretty treacherous waters, which was pretty badass. And my unit was just one long hallway. There was a long hallway where our barracks rooms were, and then quarter deck, and then everything else. But I was on the very end of the hall, and out my window I was looking at Canada. It was really cool.
So what was your experience like getting to your first assignment, meeting your shipmates, understanding, learning your job? Walk me through that entire experience.
Small boat station life is definitely a culture in itself. It's very tight knit. There's only 30 people at a unit, and you work in 48-hour slide shifts. So there's
Okay.
15 people crews. So I knew that I had to work at being accepted into the crew. And that meant,
Especially as a woman too, that must have been like pretty difficult to integrate into a very male dominated, profession in general.
yeah, it was interesting because my CO, it was a warrant officer. I had a female, and then there was actually quite a few female non-rates there. But again, the culture and me being so naive, like I didn't really understand like where my rights were and like where I could say no. It was, I remember feeling sick every time I went to work because I was just scared. I was so afraid of, I just didn't trust anybody.
Why did you feel like you didn't trust anybody?
I had a second class that, he was friendly towards me in a way. Like he was really interested in me because he found out that I like to hunt and I like to fish, and I grew up archery elk hunting. And so we kind of like had that in common, but he really wanted to make his presence and like his dominance kind of known to me. And so like every day when I would walk out on the quarterdeck at 7 a.m., he was leaning up against the wall and he would look me from head to toe and kind of just like look down at me. And he wanted to like know more about me, but he was also very extremely rude to me. I had to take on extra duties like, mess cooking, and he would come in and like white glove inspect me, and he would like tip the toaster over and be like, "Oh, you left crumbs in the toaster." And he just
Do you believe
made me
that was? Do you believe that was retaliatory in nature? Do you believe that you were being specifically targeted? Were other females treated the same way?
I definitely had to do things. I had to do the jobs that they had been putting off, like pressure washing the side of the boat bay, literally in the pouring rain, and like giving me paint scrapers and taking the screens off of the vent to like scrape all the grease out. And like he would find things, and like the day before I went to the range, I grew up shooting long rifle, so I was pretty confident there. But when it came to shooting pistols, like I didn't have much confidence there. But he made sure that I filled every magazine, like every stiff magazine. And I sat there for 2 hours by myself. So by the time I went to the range the next day, like I sucked. My hands were sore. Like he just did weird stuff like that all the time. And then he would call my duty room on my days off late at night. And he'd be like, "I need somebody to go down to the docks with me." And I'm like, "Well, it's my day off." He's like, "I don't care. Nobody else will go with me. You're coming with me." And I'm like, "Okay." So he would drive me down with him to the Native American boat docks, and he would make me stand there while he boarded their boats without them present. It was just a bad environment.
What do you think started this entire like bad culture for you getting up to your first duty station? Like, what do you think were some of the indicators? Do you think it was the people that were assigned there, the type of people that were recruiting to be in the Coast Guard at that time? Like, what do you think fostered this environment and this the way you were treated at your first duty station?
Well, nobody wanted to be there. And if you got put there, it was either because you got into trouble or you were the bottom of your class in A school.
Oh, sounds like all the missile bases in the Air Force.
Yeah. So a lot of people just didn't want to be there, I had friends there. I had really great friends, but I mean, my best guy friend there was my MK, and we kept our friendship a secret. Like we would, we didn't want people spreading rumors that we were like sleeping together, So you just had to be very methodical about every relationship you had.
Yeah.
It wasn't a safe space. Absolutely not. So
what started your entire situation with the Coast Guard? I mean, you dealt with a sexual assault and reporting and everything else. So how did you get all this fame talking about Operation Vaker? Like, how did this entire thing divulge to where we even met in the first place?
okay, so I actually wasn't assaulted at my first unit.
Okay.
I was having issues soon after. I've dealt with some prior abuse to the Coast Guard, so I was seeking mental health care because I think being submerged in that culture maybe was starting to bring it out. And being a young kid, I hadn't dealt with any of that yet, but I was also having issues that every time I went underway, my knees were swelling. And it was so bad, like I couldn't squat down like in my bed. I remember being in my barracks room and I was like trying to reach to the end of my bed and it was just like excruciating pain and my knees would turn purple. And that same guy would make me stand on the open brow in rough waters and stand watch like in the rain. But my knees would constantly hit the hatch in front of me. And so it just like it continually got worse. And I was afraid to say anything for a long time because I didn't want to be an issue. I was new. I didn't want to be outcasted. And, they would talk about people who couldn't do their job, who were wimps.
Right.
And so I was I didn't want to tell anybody for a while. Eventually it got to the point that guy had found me icing my knees and would act concerned. And a few days later, I got called into my warrant officer, my CO's office, and she's like, "Hey, so you need to go to physical therapy and probably some mental health therapy. We can't offer that for you out here." I had been traveling 2 hours in each direction on E2 pay twice a week. And so she's like, "We're going to send you TDY, so temporary orders to Air Station Port Angeles. You can work in the SK shop there and you will have access to medical appointments." I also was newly engaged. And so that was kind of my husband's way of getting me out of the barracks because he also didn't feel safe with me there. So we kind of rushed to get married so that we could live together. So they're like, "We know you're getting married, so you can move out of the unit and get a house with your husband," whatever. I was like, "Cool." So they stationed me there. I'm getting physical therapy, mental health care. Things were going good. I met my assaulter on the first or second day that I actually arrived. But that week, he was just like a really friendly person. He was older, like had gray hair, old. But that week, I got called into a lieutenant commander's office with my master chief and my warrant officer for my shop. And they slid a memorandum across the desk for intent to discharge for fraudulent enlistment.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
why did they give you fraudulent enlistment? Or why are they trying to charge you with that?
Abnormal flat feet.
Oh, okay. But they didn't catch that in MEPS? Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, exactly. So I was having issues and they didn't want to deal with it.
Sounds like the military.
Yeah. Yep. I was so new and so naive that they were hoping. They just slid it across the desk. It was very just nonchalant and pretty much said, "I want you to read this over. I'll have you in here tomorrow to sign it. And we'll have you out in about 30 days and you'll be on your way home." And I was like, "What? Like, I don't want to get out. This is where I want to be." My warrant officer from my last unit, when I was leaving and checking out, she's like, "Do you want to be in the Coast Guard?" And I was like, "Yeah, I want to be here. Like, this is what I want to do. I worked to get here." And she's like, "Are you sure?" And I'm like, "Yeah, yes, ma'am. Like, this is where I want to be." So this had been in the works before I had been transferred. So I went back to my shop, found a girlfriend, and she's like, I have somebody you need to talk to. She brought me up to this chief's office who had been like banned to the back room. He had been screwed over by our warrant officer. So this guy kind of took me under his wing and was like, hey, you need to look out for this person. You can't trust this person. Here's what you need to do to protect yourself. And he gave me a number to a JAG. So I called a JAG. And then being a daddy's girl, I called my dad. And I was like, Dad, holy crap, like what do I do? So my dad's like, I'm gonna call a congressman. So my dad called a congressman, got me in contact with one, and the congressman ended up calling headquarters and said, hey, we found out you're trying to kick one of your members out under false pretenses. If you continue to go forward with this, we're going to bring it public. So the Coast Guard dropped it, and I kind of just like sat there for weeks waiting for somebody to come talk to me.
Sure.
And my warrant officer acted like he was my friend and I could trust him. But I had a really bad feeling in my gut about the guy, and he was kind of like a snake in the grass. So I played his game and made him think that I trusted him when I didn't. I just gave him information that didn't really matter. And when he found out, he ran into the office and he slammed his hands down on my desk and called me a stupid, immature little girl. Told me it wasn't that big of a deal. I should have just told him it wasn't a big deal. And I'm like, if it wasn't a big deal, then why are you freaking out?
Right.
But I made them look stupid and they weren't happy about it. So as I'm going through this, I am getting groomed and assaulted by a retired senior chief who they had hired as an IT worker. He was very good friends with a lot of people. He played the game when the officers were around, and he was actually really well liked. He was friends with all of my bosses. He was bowling buddies with them. They all hung out outside of work. And there was a few times where I had like kind of gone to people and was like, hey, like this guy seems really friendly. And they're like, oh, that's just how he is. He's just like that. He's kind of just like an old perv. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, it's not really acceptable though.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. But nobody actually wanted to look at it. And I had been going to his office. My first class would send me to his office for different things, like to get new CAT card readers, or like my profile was broken down, and I would have to go to his office for help. But on day 1 or 2, I had gone to his office to get my profile set up. And he touched me the first time. He had an office where it was at the end of a cinder block hallway. And he had a door with a window on it with blinds on it, and there was no windows in his office. And his desk was facing the door. And then he had a separate desk that faced the wall, where you would sit at, and you would sign onto your profile, and he would help you. The first time I was sitting there, he started running his hands up my legs.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember I was still kind of naive. I mean, I grew up hanging out with my dad and like all of his friends. And so I had assumed that this older man also kind of just like wanted to take me under his wing. But I also was so uncomfortable. And I just remember like, oh, okay, like I'm going to leave. And he continued to put his hands on me any opportunity he got. After he found out that I was in trouble with the command for the fraudulent enlistment charge,
Mm-hmm.
He became more aggressive, and he used that as his opportunity to kind of do more because he knew that I was already in trouble.
Why do you think he became more aggressive during this time?
Well, he knew that I was less likely to come forward because I was already in trouble.
Gotcha.
So that was kind of his in. Like, she's not going to tell on me because she's
no one's going to
in.
believe her anyway.
Yeah, exactly. I'd already been my character had already been discredited. So,
which is classic because that's something I experienced at the Air Force Academy too. Like my academics were fine, my physical, like all the metrics at the academy were fine, but like I always got in trouble for like the stupidest shit. Like, oh, you didn't buy the right textbook, so like you get 30 confinements, or like you showed up to class late, or you got caught sleeping in your room, or something dumb like that. Like stupid shit that 18 to 22-year-olds do. And like when it came down to brass tacks with my sexual assault case and everything else, it was just like, oh, well, this guy's completely non credible. Even though I had like an entire history, like before I even went to the academy, I was a firefighter, EMT, I was search and rescue, like I did all this stuff, and like I was like so bored at the academy half the time with all these people that went there, and yeah, that's definitely a tactic that the military uses, and so do officers and senior enlisted people, is that they try to use like one or two incidences to try to constantly degrade you, constantly discredit you, so that when something actually does happen, they just try to use all these things to rally up against you, so you seem like that you're lying, and that's like completely unfair and unjustifiable.
Absolutely. They will do anything to discredit your character, so you don't have any pull when you actually do come forward.
Right.
So, yeah, he positioned himself between me and the door one time. And I just remember going, oh, God, like I was just trying to get out of there. He's like, you have to give me a hug because I helped you. And I was like, okay. And I remember I just like stood there, and he pulled me into his body and started like running his hands all down me, on my lower back, rubbing my arms, and he had his head next to my ear, and he was like, you are such a pretty girl. You are so cute. I just love your personality. Just fucking gross. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
It still makes my skin crawl. And then he would take me out the back door and go, I'm going to walk you back. I'm a gentleman. He always said stuff like that. You know, like he was always.
Well, predators always try to come off as like, you know, socially acceptable. Like you even brought this up, like you try to come off as friendly. Everybody liked the guy. Like these are common tactics that predators, especially the military, use constantly to come off as, you know, non-threatening to their general population that they integrate themselves into.
Yeah, absolutely. And like me being, you know, 30 years old now, looking back, it's very apparent.
Yeah, absolutely.
It makes me sad for my younger self.
Well, because it happens to so many young service members and they don't realize it. Because you got to understand, when people join the military, they go, you know, they leave home and they go far away. They join the military and they're putting on the uniform to defend the Constitution of the United States and help, you know, American citizens, especially the Coast Guard, helping people that are legitimately in trouble. You don't expect that these type of people exist in the military. You figure that they're the best of the best, that they are there to help people. And the fact that all these types of assaults and constant, you know, degradation of like human dignity within the service is such a tragic thing that it's a nonstop thing. It happens over and over and over again. And you experience this firsthand. And then somebody with young kids now too, it's even hard to even see, like, would I even put my child in the military or in the Coast Guard or in any other federal service branch, because this is going to happen to them at some point in time, male or female.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. And I think about that often because my oldest son wants to be an astronaut and he wants to go the Air Force route. Just, you know, and he's very proud. My sons are very proud of my service, and it that's really hard for me because they don't understand that mom's service wasn't like everybody else's. You know, the way I fought is in a completely different sense. And so one day we'll have that conversation. I will support my sons in whatever they end up wanting to do, but we're going to have like a lot of come to Jesus talks before that time. And with where the service is headed now, like, I don't know if I could ever recommend my child going in, like, after all the vaccination shit. I'm like, and seeing what it did to my friends, I'm like, it would destroy them, you know?
Oh, no, for sure. And I think that the hardest part about even the vaccine thing in the military was that we lost so many good people. You know, I regret taking that vaccine. The only reason I did was because I'm like, well, I'm already fighting a massive federal lawsuit against the military, and I don't know if I can die on two hills. I have to choose which one I have to die on. But to my luck, the interesting thing about my situation and why I'm so happy right now I haven't had any side effects is because I was the first contingent of National Guardsmen sent to the January 6th protests, right? So within 48 hours, we were on a plane and we were flown into DC. But in order to participate, we were like forcibly vaccinated by the Biden administration in order to hold security in DC. However, that vaccine that they gave us was the only FDA approved vaccine ever given anywhere in the United States. And there was only 50,000 vials. And
Wow.
I honestly think that so-called getting an FDA approval is extremely difficult to do. I don't think it was the full mRNA vaccine. I honestly
Yeah.
believe that it was like some derivative of the flu vaccine at the time because they had to rush it through. And then
Yes.
after that, that's when all the EUA vaccines and the mRNA vaccines came out. I think they just
Yeah.
gave us something to make the government happy so Biden would let us onto the Capitol building and in the White House and everything else.
Yeah.
I personally have not had any, and we had the 2 shots, right, 2 weeks apart.
Yeah.
We had one leading up to it and then like one right before we left. And that's one of the reasons I believe I haven't so far developed myocarditis or anything else. But every other vaccine given after that, when they ran out instantly, was not FDA approved. It was EUA, emergency use authorization only. And so many people like were kicked out. I remember when we deployed to CENTCOM, they were trying to force us to get boosters. And I'm like, actually, legally, you can't force me to take a booster because it's not authorized in the military to force EUA vaccines no matter what. And they were like, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, lady, no offense, but I know more about the UCMJ and the judicial system than you do. And I suggest you Google me and not fuck with me. Right. So I got out of taking the booster because they're like, you're not going on any missions. You're not leaving the wire, so to speak. You're not allowed to leave base. I'm like, go ahead. And, yeah. Try to stop me because I know the law better than you do on this.
You're like, actually, have you read the manual? Because I guarantee you haven't.
Correct. And that's the hard part though. So many, like, especially Christians and Catholics, they were forced to give up their service time because they absolutely refused to. And good for them. They stood up for it. And, even when Matt Gaetz was grilling Secretary of Defense Austin a couple of weeks ago in Congress, he even said, like, are you willing to bring back all those people that you kicked out and admit that you were wrong? And he openly said no. And you could just see the levels of corruption in the military. We've lost tens of thousands of service members over the vaccine issue. And the problem is we lost a lot of mid-grade leaders, like guys my age who we are part of the GWAT era, but we're young enough that we can still integrate with the young kids, but we're not a bunch of old geriatrics what they're doing in the military, right? So all these good, O3s and E6s and E7s left the military. And as a result, the people that are leading the military now are the best of the worst because they're the yes men. They're the ones that constantly comply. They're the ones that no matter what, they're always going to do anything. And I think I saw that in the testimony for the Coast Guard Commandant. I'm like, who is this lady? One, she kind of looked like a dude and it was weird. I didn't know what was I don't know what was going on with that, but I was just like, all right, lady. So she couldn't answer. And we'll get to that point and how you got to, from your assault, but like, what I don't understand is you're a 4-star admiral, general, whatever in the military or in the Coast Guard, and you cannot give direct, straight answers at all. These are yes or no questions, and they are incapable of answering it. And why the hell are we allowing these people to lead an entire service branch if you can't answer questions? It doesn't make any sense to me, right? And that's what I tell people constantly is you need to learn to have the courage to command, right? And if you're in a leadership position, like if I'm a sergeant, I'm expected to make decisions, yes or no. If I fail, I fail. But if I succeed, I succeed. But you take responsibility and you move on. I can make more ethical decisions than most of these senior leaders in the military. And I do not understand why there's so many people in senior leadership positions that are incapable and incompetent to make any decision whatsoever, whether that's the vaccine or even leading up to these sexual assault cases.
Well, because if they go against the grain, then I don't know about the other branches, but in the Coast Guard, I mean, everybody's kind of intertwined. You going against the grain, you get iced out. That's going to prevent you from, they can't control you. You're not going to do what they want. So why are they going to make it easy for you to move on and move up?
So when did you initial file your report and walk me through that entire process and what happened to you during that time?
Oh boy. So,
And you still have restricted and unrestricted reports in the Coast Guard? Is it still the same process?
Yeah, we did.
Okay,
yeah.
so what
I don't know about now. I heard that they're kind of doing away with that, but I'm not.
As far as I know, they still have restricted and unrestricted reports. So what level of report did you file, and then how did that start integrating with your chain of command and what happened to you?
Well, here's the kicker. So when I reported, my warrant officer, finally my MK2 realized what was happening. He recognized it and called it out, right? So I come into work. My warrant officer asks if he can speak to me outside. He brings me back behind the building.
Mm-hmm.
He asked me if so-and-so shut me in his office, positioned himself between me and the door. And I'm like, yes, sir, that's happening. It's been going on for a while. I was also getting sexually harassed by my prior first class. So I showed him the text messages, and he's like, so I want you to think about these men and their jobs, and they could lose their jobs over this. And CJIS is going to show up, and they're going to make you out to be a liar. They're not going to believe you. Do you want that to happen? And I always said, no, sir, I don't want that to happen. And he said, well, I want you to think long and hard about this before you decide to tell anybody else. And he walked away. And I went to my friend, Elizabeth, and I was like, what the heck? She noticed something was wrong, and she's like, okay, I'm taking you out. So I went and told a chief, a female chief. And turns out my assaulter had tried placing his hands on her before as well. But she ended up calling CJIS. And CJIS showed up 2 days later. And I was put into a big long room with...
and CJIS is Coast Guard Investigative Service, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So these
Which
two
is
guys...
basically like Air Force OSI, Army CID, Navy NCIS for all the other people who need to have a comparison.
Yeah. So these two guys, normal looking dudes with beards, show up, and I get put into a long conference room, and me and the CJIS agents are sitting on one side of the table. And then that female chief just came in for moral support for me. So she's sitting up against the wall. They begin to conduct an interview. And, back to that. I actually was never given a 1695. I don't know if you know what a 1695 is. 1695 is what you give somebody when they report an assault.
Yeah, we have a different form on our side, but similar process.
Victim rights. You choose restricted, unrestricted. That I never received that. So.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Yes. So I from the get-go, it wasn't handled correctly. But my agents started to conduct the interview, and they actually made me raise my left hand, and they made me touch myself in every place that he touched me. And it was just like they were sitting next to me, and they re-victimized me. I didn't know that I could say no. They didn't have anybody there advocating for me. So, yeah, that fucking sucked. And as I'm doing it, they are discrediting me and telling me if his hand would have just moved a little higher on your thigh, then this would have been assault. If his fingers would have grazed your vagina, this would have been assault. And then they're like, well, how long did he touch you there? And they would make me guesstimate how many seconds he touched me. Like that fucking mattered. Like the intent is there.
Yeah.
And so they're like, well, this actually isn't that big of a deal.
Of course they would say that, because they don't want to deal with the investigation of a higher ranking person,
They're like,
or civilian or whatever. So
yeah, they're like, this actually isn't assault. You were harassed. And that is when I started to go like, what? This man has been touching me for 4 months without my permission.
It's clearly assault. Like, it's clearly fucking assault. Like, there's no question about that.
Yeah. And I know that now, but for the last decade, I've literally battled with that in my brain. And I talked to my therapist about that, and she's like, well, since it was so fresh for you reporting it and telling somebody, and then like one of the first people you tell like literally gaslights you and downplays it, I've had to struggle with that. Like convincing my brain, like, no, it happened. It was a big deal. It shouldn't have happened. He touched you inappropriately, you
Well,
know?
they're also just trying to encourage you not to report, not to do
Yeah.
anything. And this is something I see at the Air Force Academy, right? They have something called the Teal Rope program, which they have a bunch of cadets who are so-called advocates, very
Yeah.
minimally trained. And then
Yeah.
they basically talk other cadets down from making formal reports to the SARC, or Sexual Assault Response Coordination Center. And even from my interviews, the people that they have
Yes.
involved in this system are like predators themselves. Like there was just literally this one kid who was a Teal Rope at the Air Force Academy who was charged with sexual assault, who is now advocating for victims to not report sexual assault and then would assault them. Literally a cadet got raped by another cadet who was a victim advocate. So you can see like this is just a cycle of abuse. It's an abuse of the administrative system. It doesn't go by any civilian court, legal authority in the counties or the states that they're committed in. It's just made up Harry Potter rules in order to avoid responsibility as much as possible within the military or service branches. And it's absolutely insane to me.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I mean, speaking to the choir, like it sucks that I didn't have one person that was really equipped to realize that what was happening to me was wrong. Like there was nobody there going like, what are you talking about? And I was under the impression that once you report an assault, you are transferred out.
That's the way it's supposed to be, and I think even for all
Yeah.
the people listening now on Twitter and YouTube, because you're live, like people are listening to your story right now, and they're probably extremely aggravated because this doesn't just happen to you or to me. This happens to so many service members that I
Thousands.
talk to.
So
And
many.
what
Yeah.
drives me absolutely crazy is that people are always looking for an outlet. They're coming on this podcast or discussing on the news, and it's like we tell these stories so much that people have become numb to the effects of what this is happening on military readiness and how we can do our jobs. And even like it becomes just like equipment operation. At the end of the day, if you're a maintainer on a boat or an aircraft or a ship or whatever you guys want to call your sandcastle building machines, it's not getting done, right? Because you're so focused on just trying to maintain a healthy work environment where you're not being assaulted, you're not being harassed, you're not focusing on your job. And that leads to mishaps. That leads to possibly people dying. Like this actually has financial and human life cause and effect on our service branches. And like I said, you're brave enough to come on the show and talk about this openly, and I really applaud you for that. But how many people don't speak out against these things because they're afraid of being ridiculed, right? They're afraid of being accused. Like literally the Air Force tries to call me a pedophile all the time. Like, and it's not even remotely fucking true. Like there's no evidence of this, but you know what? You can't sue the government for slander or libel. Right. But once they say one bad thing about you, now everything about you is discredited. Right. Meghan couldn't hack it through basic training. Adam fell asleep during class. So obviously everything they say is a lie. Never going to fuck with your mental health records to say that you're crazy. Right. And I know you're probably going to get to that too, but like they purposely try to degrade you. And the worst part about this is the entire administrative system in the military, the Department of Homeland Security, is rigged to a point where it is nearly fucking impossible to correct it and change it. Like I've had to go to the Air Force Board of Corrections and Military Records 6 times. I won my case. They said that there was an error or an injustice and all these things should be removed from your record. But you know who has to sign off on that? The Chief of Staff of the Air Force. And guess who didn't sign it? The Chief of Staff of the Air Force. Then I went to the President and the Department of Defense, Secretary of Defense. Whatever. It is what it is. So what recourse do we have? And not everybody has hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to federal court. Not everybody has the resources of podcasting or the military network connection we have on social media to correct these issues, because at the end of the day, they've created such a massive bureaucracy over these cases that they just hope you quit or kill yourself in the meantime.
Yep. They hope you give up. They hope you don't fight back. And most of the time, the people you're fighting against, you can become smarter than them. Really,
that's why they hate people like you and me, because it's like, you know what, you can't keep me from shutting up.
Yep. Yeah, we don't shut up. And yeah, so
you file you go to file your report, and where does it progress from there with CJIS?
I waited a few weeks. Nobody came and spoke to me. Nobody contacted me. And I waited. I was like, what the heck? Like they're just, I remember I was walking out of the clinic one day, and the guy who was harassing me and that I reported. He was standing there on the sidewalk, and at the base, it was it's on a spit. So it's just like one long skinny base. Right. And I had to walk past him, and he just stood there and just like shook his head at me. And I just remember going, nobody's coming to help me. Nobody.
No, they're purposely creating a hostile work environment to make sure that you don't do anything more that's going to harm their careers or or what they're trying to do at work. And it's fucking insanity to me.
It is, yeah. And my assaulter did that too. He just shook his head like he was disgusted with me every chance he saw me. So that day I went into that female chief's office who initially helped me. And I said, you get me out of the fucking Coast Guard or you send me back home. I will not fucking work here anymore. I shouldn't be here. So she's like, go back to your desk. I get a phone call an hour later and they're like, hey, Portland's close to home, right? I said, yeah. They're like, all right, when do you want your last day to be? And I said, I want it to be tomorrow. They cut me orders like that.
Well, it's amazing how fast they'll cut orders and get you out of there, even though I know guys will sit on fucking base for like 90 fucking days waiting shit out, right? It's
weird, right?
When it's like you're a problem and you're going to cause issue for the chain of command, they make you disappear as fast as possible so that they can't be held accountable.
Yep. Yeah, and at my checkout, my XO and my command chief, they sat me down. They did the checkout together and said, hey, we think it's a good idea that when you leave here, you don't talk about what happened to you up here.
Oh, of course they're going to say that.
Yeah. We don't want this to ruin your reputation. We don't want it to follow you around. And I was like, oh, okay. So I was like afraid to tell anybody. And I didn't for a while. And I didn't tell any of my friends because I was under the assumption that they would get roped into it and get in trouble.
Well, that's the perception that they create, even though that's not the reality of it. Like you start reporting and start filing and stuff. It's like people have to do something, right? They have to action these reports, but they put this fear of God into people to make them think that if you do something, we're just going to make it worse for you. And for the most part, they will. Like they'll fuck with your records, they'll ruin your reputation, everything else. But like, how is that having any respect for human dignity throughout this entire process?
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard looking back. Like you know what? I wouldn't have the knowledge I have now if I wouldn't have gone and figured it out myself, you know? So
how did this all get involved in the Operation Vaker? How did you guys end up in a Senate testimony hearing? Like, let's get to that story because so this assault happened to you. You didn't get justice. You left the Coast Guard. You know, nothing was righted for you. You got thrown to the street like you didn't exist, like your service didn't matter. And then years later, all of a sudden you're in Washington, D.C. Like, how did that whole thing occur?
So my chief, female chief I had once I got stationed down in Portland, close to home, she worked in the recruiting office that I went through. So she wasn't my recruiter, but she was in there. We knew each other. She ended up being the non-rate liaison there. Once I met her, I began to fight, right? And I had her behind me and I was like, damn, I got a chief behind me now. And then my captain was behind me. Still to no avail, nothing happened. But they fought for me, right? And I just continued to not shut up. So fast forward 9 years, February, I get a phone call from my chief and she goes, you ready to tell your story? And I said, fuck yeah, I am. She goes, we got an opportunity and we need you there. They initially were just going to have the master chief and my warrant officer friend. And she goes, you know what? I think it would be really good to have somebody represent the lower enlisted.
Yeah, sure.
But they couldn't get anybody willing that was active duty because of fear of retaliation.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, nobody wants to. Even all my classmates now who are 05, so I actually be a lieutenant colonel now. Like, even though, like, Dorito, you're right, we love what you're doing, but there's no way we're going to go public because look what they did to you. They absolutely destroyed your life the last 14 years. I'm not risking my family, my career, my money, all this other stuff. It's just not worth it to me. It just shows the level of power that these people have.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I was like, I'm your girl. I fucking put the work in. I have been in therapy consistently. I mean, like, I've done a lot of shit to like get to a point where I feel like I can help people and have insight and be okay through it. Mm-hmm. So I did it. Coast Guard flew me down to Alameda. and they filmed me telling my story. You can see it on YouTube. So they filmed me telling my story on day 1. Day 2, they filmed us like doing questions for like training that they're going to use supposedly. I don't know if they're ever going to use them, but whatever. So that was the beginning of March. They were supposed to be released in April for Sexual Assault Prevention Month or Awareness Month or whatever.
Sure. Yeah.
April rolls around and it doesn't happen. And we're sitting there waiting. Like all of us are like, we just really exposed some of the hardest parts of ourselves. And they were going back and forth for a while, The other 2 survivors that I did the stories with, they're both active duty, so they just got to sit and wait. I realized, I'm like, you know what? They don't own me anymore. This is my story, and I can be in control of it. I can control the narrative. So when they were going back and forth and talking about that they probably weren't going to release them or legal this, legal that, I said, you know what? I have a copy. And so I released it on YouTube.
Good for you.
Yeah. And I felt really damn good because I was like, you know what? You guys didn't do anything for me then, and I really don't have faith you're going to do anything now. So I did it, and it was really awesome for me. And it started spreading like wildfire. And I have been contacted pretty consistently since by like survivors that are currently still in, past survivors, people who need help. Anyways, a few weeks after that passed, we see a document that came from Coast Guard headquarters, and it is talking about the pros and cons of the Storyteller project that I was on. And it came from the Coast Guard legal team. And if you went to the second page down to the bottom, somebody ended up leaking it to the media. I did not. I really, honestly, I have no idea how it got out there. I think
maybe it was that public affairs girl who was creeping me on LinkedIn the other day from the Coast Guard.
Probably.
Yeah. She, like, as soon as we started talking, there was like all these Coast Guard people looking me up on LinkedIn. And yeah, I'll have to find what her name was, but like, yeah, it was absolutely ridiculous.
Oh my God.
I'm looking at it. I'm looking at it right now as you're talking.
Yeah, you're like, come find me. But anyways, we saw this document, and it stated that the Coast Guard, these videos could exasperate the narrative by some that the Coast Guard has a sexual assault crisis, and that they don't recommend releasing it. And I was like, okay. So
her name is Taylor Wright, the executive social media manager of the U.S. Coast Guard Academy. Yeah. So Taylor Wright, yeah, right here, whatever your name is. Yeah, I know you're looking at me, and I know that you are tracking me down, and you hate me and everyone else that I talk to. So bring it on, Taylor.
Wonderful. Love that. So anyway,
fuck these people. I don't care. Like, what are you going to do? You're going to do absolutely nothing.
Yep. So I ended up releasing the other 2 videos because I felt that it was extremely necessary that everybody saw Master Chief Cloud's and Mr. Bell's stories, because they hold so much. Like, that is so helpful, especially like Mr. Bell being a man coming out and being like,
well, no one believes men. I will tell you, I've dealt with that for the last 14 years. No one believes me about my sexual assault, that I was drugged and assaulted at a party, but here I am, and I'm not going to not stop telling my story. So
absolutely. We'll never stop. So Senate ended up getting a hold of that document, and I think it was Senator Blumenthal, Senator Ron Johnson, they both mentioned it. But Senator Hassan of New Hampshire, she spent her entire 7 minutes advocating for us and trying to get Linda Fagan to answer for why she was trying to hide them and trying to silence us. So that's how I ended up in the OFA, Operation Fouled Anchor circus that's ensued.
And this is what blows my mind about this entire thing, though. Like, you told your stories, you have the credibility, you have the evidence, you've done these things, and you bring the 4-star admiral or the commandant of the Coast Guard in front of the Senate, and still nothing happens. Like, that's what's wild to me, is nothing happens. Like, okay, we asked a bunch of questions, we made them look like complete clowns, and now what? We're gonna just go back to, business as usual, right? And this is why, I mentioned the Dorito Act to you, because, this is going to be a piece of legislation, hopefully, that we can work collectively together over the next couple of years, hopefully trying to get this passed, that it puts actual legal punishment and accountability to military leaders in the civilian court system outside of the UCMJ. Because, like, you can't charge Fagan with anything because the military is not going to do it. They're not going to charge her with, like, obstruction of justice. They're not going to charge her with falsifying official documents. And even like a week or two after your hearing, like, you even said, hey, my mental health records are falsified. And I'm like, wow, look at that. They went and fucked with your mental health records. And then after your FOIA request that they refused for years, once again, going up into your credibility and all the stories that you did. And now, once again, someone like you is dealing with the same exact thing I dealt with, where they go after the mental health records in order to try to discredit everything that you're saying as a last-ditch effort to save themselves.
Yeah, it's been wild. I feel lucky that I know my truth now. So what are you gonna do?
No, and I want to commend you for coming on the podcast today and telling your story. And, like, it's not over. Like, it's just starting, right? It's because, what happened to you is horrible, but we can't change our past. You held military leaders accountable. You took them to the highest levels that we could at this moment in time. And even now, nothing's going to happen. So, the one thing that I would encourage people to do is, reach out to Meghan, or reach out to me, or reach out to anyone involved in these cases, because collectively we can do something together where we can hold military leaders accountable, whether we push a Dorito Act or whatever it gets reformed to be, because you know how Congress is going to change the name of that like 14 times. Before they actually sign their name to it, but the thing is like, start calling your congressmen, start calling your senators. All you got to do is Google their names, look up your representatives, give them a phone call, say, hey, we want to support the Dorito Act, or we want to support, the resolution of Operation Fouled Anchor, or whatever that is, because these people will do absolutely nothing unless they're pressured by the public. So it's going to require thousands of phone calls over the next year or so to these people where oh crap, my constituents are pissed off. And if my constituents are pissed off, then that means I'm not going to get reelected. So I better do something about it. And unfortunately, that's the level of retard we're at. Nobody is going to do anything for the sake of doing things because it's the right thing to do. They're only going to do things that are going to affect their ability to maintain their positions of power. And I give all the credit to Senator Blumenthal and whoever else is involved. But even I had a sidebar conversation with him in the Senate hearing room, and he dismissed me after I had a conversation with him. He's like, oh, well, that sounds really terrible. Please reach out to my office. And I'm just like, what? We just had a hearing with a 4-star admiral, and I'm telling you that this happens at the Air Force Academy. It happens at West Point. It happens at Annapolis. It happens at Merchant Marine Academy, and all the service branches, Reserve and Guard as well.
Nobody wants to take that on.
Nobody wants to take it on, because you start fucking with the military and billions of dollars being allocated to these service branches. Now you're affecting defense contractor jobs. Now you're affecting all the other inner workings of things. And it sucks that still to this day, no one really cares about sexual assault. And I'm sure I'm going to interview 10, 20 other people this year with the same story. What are they going to do? Nothing. And that sucks. I'm just being honest about it. Like, nobody cares about rape and sexual assault in the military, because for 99% of the public in America, it doesn't affect them, but it does. It affects their readiness, it affects their kids, it affects the future stability and security of this country, right? And that's why I want to encourage people to also reach out to you. Like, if you have been sexually assaulted, if you've been harassed, and you're not comfortable talking to me, that's fine. Like, I'm just some random dude from the Air Force Academy. Reach out to Meghan. She's been through the process even more advanced than I have, because collectively together, we could start building this roster and forwarding it to the group of congressmen and senators and congresswomen that Meghan and I and a bunch of other people are currently working with in the background, because we didn't get any resolutions into the NDAA this year, because obviously it's an election year and everything's absolute chaos and nobody cares about anything but themselves. But going into 2025 and 2026, before the next election cycle, we can actually maybe make an effective change. And it's only going to happen if the work starts now. We can't wait until 3 months before, the session in 2026. We have to start this work now. So after after August recess and, after the holidays, starting in January and February, like it's game on. Like everybody needs to be present. Everybody needs to be there, and everyone needs to start reaching out and sending letters, leaving voicemails, and making those phone calls.
Yes, absolutely. I'm here for it.
So Meghan, how can people reach out to you online? Where can they find you? How can they connect with you?
Through Instagram or Facebook.
What's your handles? You got to give your handles to these people that are watching you live right
Meghan
now.
Klement, my name. Meghan Klement. There's no other Meghan with an H, Klement with a K. So, there, those places.
Great. Well, yeah, I want to thank you for coming on the show today. I think this is a really great, productive conversation. I hope we get some resolution in your case, and I hope collectively people can start working together to make our military great again and really make these resolutions pass through and force Congress and military leaders to accountability and to do their jobs.
Amen. Yep. We're here for it. We're not going to be quiet, right?
Well, thanks so much.
Yep.